And so, finally, we're back. This is another FM movie. Today, we'll be trying to do something outrageously difficult. Impossible, you may even say. We're aiming to win the UEFA Champions League. Okay, that's not impossible on its own. However, today, we'll be managing FC Astana of Kazakhstan. And with Kazakhstan lying across the European-Asian border, we're instilling a rule that we can use only Asian players. Yeah, we're going to try and win the European Champions League with only Asian players. So I think it's time to get started. I hope you all enjoy. We began our story by holidaying one season to find out who the Kazakhstan champions were going to be. And yeah, it turned out to be FC Astana. A quick Google tells us that FC Astana were formed as Lokomotiv Astana in 2009 before becoming simply Astana in 2011. They play their football at the 30,000-seater Astana Arena, and they've won the Kazakhstan Premier League 7 times. In all this time, they've only competed in the Champions League proper just once, although they've had plenty of defeats in the qualifying rounds. In today's adventure, we'll need to build on this singular appearance, and build on it in quite a big way, going from just competing in the group stage to actually winning the entire competition. The squad that we inherited was strong enough to have won the league, but was made up of mainly non-Asian players. This meant that before we could get stuck into the Champions League qualifying rounds that we were to enter soon, we'd need to go and do a bit of a rebuild. A rebuild with a particularly Asian theme. As champions, and with the opportunity to go and play in Europe's premier competition, we'd been blessed with a healthy transfer budget. We had £15 million to spend and £97,000 per week in wage budget available to us. With a little bit of clever structuring of deals, I had a good feeling about being able to rebuild this squad and line up on day one with a much more Asian lineup. And so, that's what I went and did. A swift £30 million spent and an exodus of non-Asian players in the transfer outs, the squad immediately had taken on a very Asian feel. We had players from Iran, Japan, Syria, Iraq, Korea, Palestine, the Philippines, Thailand, and the list goes on. At this stage, I could tell you about every single player that we brought in, but there's a lot of new players here, and I'm sure we'll get to know them as time goes on, because I'm not expecting this challenge to be a short one. Some highlights of our incomings though. Payam Niazmand, the goalkeeper from Iran. At right back, Sei Moroya is a Japanese international and is joined by his compatriot up front, Shuto Machino. Now listen, I'm not a linguist, but I'm going to choose to decide here that his name translates directly to shooting machine. And that, my friends, is what I look for in a striker. I was also pretty impressed by a very decent midfielder from Syria by the name of Jalil Elias, who interestingly had played almost the entirety of his career in Argentina. Now naturally the team cohesion at this stage, well, it was very poor. I mean, this is understandable, the players had barely met each other. But this didn't stop us getting off to the completely perfect start with a 5-0 thumping in our opening league match. Shuto Machino got the first goal in the first half before we ran riot in the second. The perfect start and a result that you would imagine would start to bring together our team of misfits from across countries in Asia. Now, of course, this should be expected. Domestic victories were a given. We were favourites for the league, and the priority of this adventure was going to be the Champions League. The Champions League, which was about to get underway for the very first time. We entered in the first qualifying round, and we'd be up against Birkirkara of Malta. Now, I can't really say I was scared of Birkirkara of Malta. We had Japanese internationals in our squad at this stage, and it looked like their key player was wearing a suit, but we had to be professional nonetheless. And as Simon Lingbo, our left back from the Philippines, curled in our 8th goal in the home leg to make it 16-0 on aggregate, I think it's fair to say that we took things professionally. This saw us through to the second qualifying round, where we'd come up against the Greek side Panathinaikos. The away leg was tough, and when Panathinaikos made it 2-0 in the 90th minute, courtesy of this goal here, you'd be excused for thinking that our Champions League campaign was about to come to an abrupt end. But this late goal scored by Chanarong Promsrikau gave us a little bit of hope and the self-belief to mount a resurgence in the home leg. And that self-belief was enough to give us a thumping 4-1 victory in the home leg, giving us a 5-3 aggregate victory. The star of the show for us was Ode Daba, our Palestinian striker who put us into a strong 2-0 lead before Panathinaikos got a goal back, before we finished the job with another goal from Promsrikau and a final late goal from Sheshmi. Our 5-3 aggregate win had booked us a place in the third qualifying round, where we'd come up against Maccabi Tel Aviv of Israel. And then after a 3-2 away win in Israel, we knew that a decent result at home would book our place in the Champions League qualifying playoff. And a Shuto Machino hat-trick did exactly that. He scored the opening goal after 9 minutes, added the second just 3 minutes later, and completed his hat-trick just before half-time with this smart finish. That's not to mention the fact that he also missed 2 penalties in this match. But no need to worry, a smashing finish from Ali in the second half gave us a 4-0 win, and therefore a comprehensive 7-2 victory on aggregate. Now, all that stood between us and the Champions League proper for only the second time in our history was Dynamo Kiev of Ukraine. But this is where I need to bring us our first real disappointment of this story. A 2-1 loss in the first leg against Dynamo Kiev gave us everything to do in the second leg back in Kazakhstan. Despite a late lifeline scored by Daba, we actually missed out on the chance of going back home level, courtesy of another penalty miss from Shuto Machino in the 95th minute. Seriously, this guy's got 16 penalties and he's missed 3 already. And I suppose in adventures like this, you're probably now expecting a thumping home win to qualify us for the Champions League. But it didn't happen. Andrei Yarmolenko, Ukrainian legend Andrei Yarmolenko, finished smartly, and despite our dominance on the stats, Dynamo Kiev ran out 1-0 winners on the night and 3-1 winners over the course of the tie. Our first season Champions League journey was over. And with that disappointment, and with the aim of this adventure to win the Champions League, the remainder of the season became all about building towards next year. We would be able to have a fun run in the Europa League, which would ultimately end at the hands of Fenerbahce in the round of 16. But in my own head, my focus was on getting ready for Season 2. Predictably, Season 2 began in the transfer window, bringing in more players from across Asia to take us up a level or two. In goal, we'd upgraded to Dayan Makawa, actually brought in from Vissel Kobe back in the January of last season. He would be our new number 1 and an exceptionally capable one at that. In defence, the likes of Seimaroa will be joined by players such as Koki Mashida, a 27-year-old Japanese international brought in from Union SG in Belgium. Up front, we would now pair Ode Daba with the very experienced Mehdi Taremi. The former Porto and Inter striker had been brought in on a free transfer, and he had big shoes to fill, coming in to replace the outgoing Shuto Machino, who had been sold to Al Hazem for £6.5 million. In truth, it was a little bit of a risk to say goodbye to Machino's 30-odd goals from last campaign, but those concerns were soon eased as Mehdi Taremi scored 2 in his opening 2 games. At this stage, I should probably mention that we did end up winning the league last season. In fact, we won it at an absolute canter. 36 wins out of 38, just 2 losses over the course of the campaign, and 108 points on the board. Again, the league domestically isn't going to be our focus. We had enough good players to easily win the league last season, and if anything, we'd strengthened going into this one, and were listed as Even's favourite to win the league again. Now, as I digress to tell you about our league-winning domestic affairs, I need to come back to the team to tell you about our new record signing. In midfield, Ayo Tanaka, signed from Leeds United for £16 million, would be the most expensive signing to date. The Japanese international would bring us experience and real quality in our midfield, and he'd take up the role as the segundo volante in our midfield too. Just under £30 million spent, £13.5 million brought in, we were once again ready to attack a new season in the Champions League. And that would once again begin in the qualifying rounds. Now, forgive me for not bringing you every goal of our first qualifying round campaign, but it ended 19-0 on aggregate as we faced Hamrun Spartans, again of Malta. If there's one thing that we can do well, it's beat Maltese opposition. Allow me to show you the fifth of Song Min Kyu's 5 goals in the second leg as we won 10-0 at home. That relatively easy game secured us passage to the second qualifying round, where we would once again come up against Israeli opposition, this time Hapoel Tel Aviv. And again, I'm not going to be able to show you every goal because we marched past these with a 7-0 aggregate scoreline. In fact, relatively straightforward progression through the rounds was becoming a little bit of a pattern in this year's qualification campaign. A pattern we continued in the third qualifying round as we took on Derry City of Northern Ireland. This time a 3-1 victory courtesy of Ode Daba's 2 goals in the return home leg. The first smashed into the far corner and the second finished nicely at the near post. A 3-1 victory on aggregate actually felt quite close compared to our previous rounds, and it meant that we'd made it through to the playoff again. A win in the next round would see us into the Champions League proper. And in that playoff, we went back to the big wins. A 4-1 second leg home victory added to a 5-1 away win meant we progressed past Djurgårdens of Sweden 9-2 on aggregate. Admittedly, we were helped along the way a little bit by a couple of own goals from Une Larsson of Djurgårdens inside the first half of this second leg. The first deflecting in off him a little bit unluckily, and the second doing exactly the same. In the second half, we wrapped things up with a couple of well-taken goals, and our job was done. We had qualified for the Champions League proper for the first time since the 2015-16 season. And this meant we'd line up in the league phase alongside the European royalty. The European royalty, which one day we'd have to try and overcome. I must admit, looking at this list, it made me feel a bit nauseous at the prospect of having to beat the likes of Real Madrid, Man City, Liverpool, Bayern to one day win this trophy. And the nausea didn't ease as the fixture list for the competition was revealed. We would play Slavia Prague away, Tottenham Hotspur away, Inter at home, Frankfurt away, Ludogorets at home, Marseille at home, Bayern Munich away from home, and then FC Barcelona would be coming to the Astana Arena in January. When our league phase games rolled around, I picked out the games that I thought we could feasibly get points in. Slavia Prague away and Ludogorets and Marseille at home stood out. And honestly, if we could use just those as a springboard, the rest of the games would just be all about experience really at this level. But when we dismantled Slavia Prague 4-1 in our opening game, I will admit my expectations shifted slightly. We were brought back to earth as Spurs, and then Inter beat us comfortably in the next 2 fixtures, but a very admirable draw away at Frankfurt in game week 4 set us up nicely for the home games versus Ludogorets and Marseille. Results in these 2 games would genuinely give us a shot at sneaking through, and when our Syrian defender Ali Reyna powered in this last-minute winner versus Ludogorets, we were beginning to believe. And that belief became a very real reality against Marseille as we dispatched of the French side 3-1 in the next game. This put us on 10 points and comfortably in the top 24 sides, even if we then predictably lost to Bayern and Barcelona in the remaining games. We hadn't only managed to qualify for the Champions League proper this year, but we'd made it out of the league phase. Next up, the knockout playoff, and our opponent, Aston Villa of the Premier League. Honestly, this was supposed to be a very predictable but thoroughly respectable exit from the competition. But maybe it was the 4,000-mile journey to Kazakhstan that took it out of Aston Villa, because as our Thai striker Sufanat Muanta made it 2-0 on the night, our wildest dreams of Champions League progression, they seemed to be coming true. And then, after a hard-fought draw in the Midlands in the return leg, a date with destiny was set up against Barcelona in the Champions League round of 16. Seriously, we're in the Champions League last 16. Surely though, this would be the end of the line for our fairy tale, right? In front of a packed crowd at the Astana Stadium, the first half was cagey and the score was locked at 0-0. Again, you had to wonder, Were our opponents suffering the consequences of such a hefty away trip? Well, in the 52nd minute, that certainly looked to be the case, as a breakaway down the left led to our Astana boys taking the lead as Tanaka's shot deflected in off Jules Koundé. Lift off. Barcelona, though, they don't lie down easily, and they got themselves level just 3 minutes later through Ferran Torres. And that looked to be that. A draw against Barcelona and the best result of our story so far. Except, that wasn't it. In the 80th minute, as the game looked to be heading towards a draw, Song Kum Song, our Korean new-gen striker, signed only a couple of months before, popped up to give us the lead on 87 minutes. And then take us to absolute dreamland 3 minutes later by making the score 3-1. Inexplicably, we would be heading to Camp Nou with a 2-goal advantage. The return leg took place a week later. And then, well, Barcelona, who are no strangers to a European remontada, well, they did exactly that. Frenkie de Jong scored on 5 minutes, and we got so close to seeing it through before Robert Lewandowski dispatched this penalty to take the game to extra time. Not a lot happened in extra time, honestly, other than our Vietnamese left-back Jason Pendant picking up this second yellow card, and this meant penalties. A footballing coin toss to decide whether this night would be our greatest night in Astana's history. But this time, it wasn't to be. Barcelona didn't miss a single penalty, and Dior Zholmatov could only bury his penalty into the goalkeeper's arms. And that was it. We were out. And the fairy tale was over. At least, for now. Another year's Champions League dream was over, but the giant leaps forward couldn't be ignored. We'd been able to mix it with some of Europe's biggest hitters, and suddenly, this impossible dream didn't seem so impossible. And what I've not even gone into detail about here has been the club's ongoing recruitment drive to bring the very best Asian players possible to the club. The team on the pitch had been constantly evolving to get us to this point, and now, with the whole of Europe now seeing us operate at the top table, it was time to get even more serious in the transfer market for Season 3.
Hey folks, it's intermission time. Today's production is brought to you by Surprise Shirts. Surprise Shirts are a leading football shirts mystery box company and offer surprise authentic football shirts from around the world. Order today using the code Clayts 10 for 10% off. They even offer an FM edition box that ensures that the shirt you receive is from a club that is definitely playable in the FM 24 base game. You can control the obscurity of the shirt you receive too, using the handy sliders on the website. And if you wanted to make receiving cool surprise football shirts a regular thing, perhaps become a member of their subscription service. And hey, you can get 20% off your first box with that using the code Clayts20 at checkout. Once again, today's production is brought to you by Surprise Shirts. Please take your seats again, folks. The movie is about to recommence.
As I welcomed the new signings of the summer window 2026, it felt like a significant moment in the save. We'd spent pretty heavily on Japanese talent, Atsuki Ito costing just over £11 million to bolster our midfield options, and 2 new youngsters, Daiki Naito, a young striker, and Tatsuya Mikado, a young defensive midfielder. The 2 18-year-olds probably not starters for now, but the ability to attract young Asian talent for the future felt like an opportunity and simply the smart play. But the biggest headline of this window wasn't that Japanese talent. Instead, it was the introduction of a bona fide football manager legend. Rooney Bargi was now an Astana player. Now listen, stop, I know what you're thinking. It's true, he represents Sweden, and you're probably thinking he's not actually Asian, but did you know our football manager Golden Boy was born in Kuwait City and was also eligible to represent Syria? And that was good enough for me. Welcome to Astana, Rooney Bargi. The team now looked like this, and I'd moved away from a 3 at the back system that we were playing last year in favour of the old trusted, the 4-2-3-1. Makawa continued to keep goal, and in front of him a settled back 4 now consisting of a young Chinese player by the name of Wang Yang. And he was absolutely massive. Yes, we had a massive wang. The new arrival Ito would partner Tanaka in the midfield, and we'd also brought in a new striker by the name of Motoki Nagakura to lead the line. And we were hoping that Rooney Bardi would be able to create the goals off of the right wing. The bench was now full of young talent. We had Naito, Song Come Song, and Tatsuya Mikado among others. And of course, domestically, we were massive favourites to win the league again. Due to the Kazakhstan Premier League still ranking below the second division in Spain and France, and even below the top division in Cyprus, we'd still need to qualify for the Champions League proper, starting in the first qualifying round. But our new look team got off to an absolute flyer, beating the Georgian team Dinamo Tbilisi by 5-0. In fact, we didn't even allow them to have a single shot at goal. The sweetest part of the win, though, was the debut goal for Rooney Bardi right before the end, as he lashed home on his left foot into the top corner, showing just a little bit of that quality that we were really hoping he could bring to us. And with that quality on board now, our aims were clear. We needed to qualify for the Champions League proper, whilst also doing our business domestically. And once again, and though it wouldn't be easy, we needed to try and go one step further than last year's round of 16 finish in the Champions League. And well, the qualifiers proved to be a bit of a breeze. After that 5-0 win in the first leg against Tbilisi, we beat them 2-1 away from home and were rewarded with a tie against Flora Tallinn of Estonia. Now, I'm sure Estonia is a beautiful place. All I really know about it is that it produced Ragnar Klavan, and Flora Tallinn could probably have done with big Ragnar the Red, as we ended up beating them 12-0 on aggregate. A nice touch was that Wang Yang had started to get himself on the end of corners, and 3 of our 12 goals were the product of his massive head in this tie. It was a slightly tougher draw in the next round, the third qualifying round of the competition, where we came up against Dinamo Zagreb of Croatia. And now on this occasion, against a team that played regular European football, we needed the quality of players such as Rooney Bardi. And he opened the scoring after 7 minutes in the first leg away from home. We ended up winning that first leg 3-1, and a 2-2 draw back at home was enough to see us through to the Champions League Champions Path playoff. Here we would face the Serbian side FK Partizan. Again, we'd go away from home first, but 2 late goals from Sufanat Mianta after Rooney Bardi once again opened the scoring gave us a 3-0 victory away from home. And our passage through to the Champions League proper was all but assured. And then it was officially assured after we beat them 3-0 at home after 2 goals from Oshima and the final one in a 6-0 aggregate victory, once again from Rooney Bardi. Domestically, we were also doing the business, although we weren't currently top of the league, but that was only because we'd played 2 games less than the current leaders, Ordubasi Shymkent. Our early season form made us huge favourites to go and retain the title domestically, and I think gave us a really good chance once we got to the Champions League proper and the league phase. Now all that remained was to find out who we'd be playing. Rennes, Ajax, Bayern Munich, Juventus, Sevilla, Feyenoord, Inter and Arsenal. On paper, some tough games in there, obviously. Bayern Munich at home, Juventus away, as well as Inter and then Arsenal. But we've been here before, and some of these games looked pretty winnable. Rennes away from home to begin with, as well as the home games against Sevilla and Feyenoord. These would surely be critical. We'd go into this league phase full of confidence and full of hope. But, well, this hope was dashed pretty quickly this year. And despite drastic improvement in the next 2 games, an impressive win away against Ajax and an even more impressive win at home to Bayern Munich, well, the rest of the campaign was nothing short of miserable. Perhaps that first game against Rennes had set the tone, but we failed to win another game in our league phase. We drew with Juventus, lost to Sevilla, drew with Feyenoord, and 2 miserable losses to Inter Milan and Arsenal meant that our Champions League journey for this year would end at the league phase. Heartbreakingly, just 2 places below the playoffs in 26th place. It had been a Champions League campaign that didn't reach the heights of last season, but another year of experience, another year of competing at the very top level. It would be easy to get downhearted and start to think that this was impossible. But we knew that regular appearances in the Champions League would only bring more money into the club and allow us to bring in better players every season. And so, for the next season or 2, this would be our aim. Season 4 we made our way through the qualifiers and even qualified from the league phase to the knockout playoff round. But this was where our adventure ended. We were routinely beaten by Arsenal, with the score finishing 3-0 on aggregate. Maybe next year was the mood in the camp. Things, they didn't feel all that far away. But, well, the following campaign was nothing short of a disaster. A shock defeat in the qualifiers to Dinamo Zagreb meant our Champions League journey was over before it even began. 5 seasons in now, and we were back to the very beginning. Not even being able to qualify for the competition we were supposed to one day win. And to make matters worse, our star man Rooney Bargi had been swiped away from us by the Saudi side Al Ettifaq. It felt like we'd hit rock bottom. But sometimes, in stories like this one, it takes something like this, something crushing and disappointing, to bring about a sort of clarity, a focus, a chance to reset, a chance this year to take the pressure off a bit and bring back the good times. Because the consolation, you see, was that through not qualifying for the Champions League, we'd once again be in the Europa League for a season. And, with a real chance to win this competition, this felt like an opportunity to run with. Wait a second, cut the music. We're in a Champions League semi-final here. The semi-final. The good feeling around the club, started with that pressure off Europa League run up until the semi-final, had re-energised everything about the club in the past 3 seasons. And now, suddenly, we were in a Champions League semi-final against one of the most decorated clubs in the history of football, Real Madrid. But before that game, I feel like I should reintroduce the playing squad after 3 seasons of recruitment and development. Our goalkeeper was now the mohawked Japanese number 1, Shu Fujioka. Nah, I also have no idea how a goalkeeper with that on his head can only have 4 eccentricity. In front of him, Wang Yang had now racked up over 150 appearances for the club and led a defence that featured his extraordinarily sized head, a Chinese compatriot Chen Hong, a speedy Iranian left-back Reza Golizadeh, and a 6'4" Thai centre-back named Patarapong Makmi. In front of the defence, Tatsuya Mikado had blossomed into a fine midfielder and would usually be partnered by Zidane Iqbal of Iran or the Korean Ko Lee. But we'd perhaps developed most in the attack. On the left wing, a superstar signing of Kaoru Mitoma. On the right, the nurtured talent of Daiki Naito, and in the number 10 role, the huge signing of Fabio Carvalho of Portugal. We'd once again be playing the partial nationality card to incorporate Fabio, who had a partial nationality of East Timor. But there was nothing partial about the nationality of the man that led the line for us. Song Kum Song had now scored over 100 goals in the yellow of Astana and had already secured his place in the club's history books. But would those history books need a few more chapters to be written now, as we headed into a semi-final showdown against Real Madrid? We headed into the first leg with just one change from our regular lineup, with Al Abbas starting at left back, and we'd travel first to the Bernabeu. A 2031 Real Madrid side was about as scary as you'd expect it to be, with the likes of Bellingham and Mbappe starring. And it didn't take them long to assert their dominance. With just 5 minutes on the clock, Kylian Mbappe surged down the left and finished to make it 1-0. Before just 4 minutes later, Savinho's corner was then headed in by Eder Militao. It was a disastrous start. 2-0 down within the first 10 minutes, and it didn't get any better. In fact, it got twice as bad. Just past the 20-minute mark, Jude Bellingham made it 3-0 with this smart finish, and he was there again 4 minutes later to head home to make it 4-0 to Real Madrid. We were being mauled apart in the Bernabeu. At half-time, a team talk to end all team talks was needed. And yeah, I berated them. But also, a quick reminder of everything the past 3 years had taught us. A reminder that we belonged here, and that right now, this was embarrassing. And in the second half, it seemed to work. Song Come Song delivered lifeline number 1 on 67 minutes with a sweet left-footed finish, and then, with just 8 minutes to play, he was there again to make the score 4-2. 4-2 away from home. Look, it wasn't ideal, but we'd somehow given ourselves a tiny hint of a chance back in Kazakhstan. And as that second leg rolled around, talk of remontadas and miracles became louder and louder. We started well. After 10 minutes, Fabio Carvalho went so close, hitting the post from distance, but then, 15 minutes later, it was indeed Carvalho's persistence that would eventually pay off as he slotted home in the first half, and very suddenly, we were back within 1 goal of parity. And then, just after half-time, it happened. We were level. A 25-yard P-roller from Chen Hong beat the goalkeeper, and it made it 2-0 on the night and 4-4 on aggregate. There were 35 minutes left to play, and we had home advantage, and perhaps most importantly, the momentum in the tie. But on this night, we didn't need 35 more minutes. In fact, we barely needed 1. Because with the wind in our sails, Fabio Carvalho was there again to sweep home immediately to give us a 5-4 aggregate lead. And we currently, as it stood, had a place in the Champions League final to hold on to. And here you'd expect a Real Madrid rescue mission, right? But there wasn't one. Their spirit had been broken, and we were able to hold on. 3-0 the final score, 5-4 on aggregate, and we made it. A place in the Champions League final 2031, where we would be facing Barcelona. In the lead up to the final, it started to hit home. This was it. This was the opportunity to achieve everything we set out to achieve. And yeah, it did feel like we were here ahead of schedule, despite the 7 seasons of progress. And we did now have a sprinkling of stardust in our squad. The additions of Mitoma and Carvalho had added to the superstars that we'd made ourselves in Wang Yang and Song Come Song. But really, was our squad anything in comparison to the star-studded sides of Europe's elites? But I guess the wins this season against Manchester City, Chelsea, and now Real Madrid had probably proved that it was. But of course, we had one more hurdle to overcome. The final would take place in Lisbon, and when a Barcelona side emerged from the tunnel, including the talents of a now prime Lamine Yamal, the team talk was one of trying to focus our players. Do it for the fans was the message. And on the biggest stage yet, they were focused. It was an almost flying start as Wang Yang went close not once but twice, only to be denied by Diogo Costa before Yoon Tae put it narrowly over. But then, just past the 20-minute mark, Reza Golizadeh picked out Fala with a beauty of a ball over the top, and guess who was there to apply the finish in the middle? Song Come Song. His header gave us a 1-0 lead in the Champions League final. Was this it? Was this the game where we could complete our mission? Well, in response, Barcelona immediately upped the ante in search of an equaliser and went close straight away through an Evan Ferguson header, and then after that, a Frenkie de Jong free kick. We were now riding our luck a little and just needed to get to half time. But unfortunately, well, we couldn't. On 42 minutes, de Jong played Ansu Fati through, and Fati smashed the ball home left-footed to equalise. A glorious finish, and we were back to square one. Still though, level at the break in a Champions League final would be a great place to be. Except Barcelona had other ideas. Deep into first half injury time, Gavi seized on a loose ball in the midfield and released Matheus Cunha, who swept it past Fujioka, and suddenly, in what felt like a blink of an eye, we'd gone from leading to trailing. We needed a huge second half, and immediately after the break, we almost brought ourselves level as Song Come Song hit the post, but it wasn't to be. The final, the biggest game in our history, had gotten away from us, because no matter what we tried to do in the second half, we just couldn't break Barcelona's resolve again. Barcelona, they went on to lift the trophy in Lisbon, and we were runners-up. We had gotten as close as it was feasibly possible to get without winning it. And you may think that we would be feeling sorry for ourselves. Perhaps we'd be thinking that this was our main chance, and we'd missed it. We were back down on the canvas again, but this time, it had really started to feel like we belonged at the top. And so, we pulled ourselves back up, and pretty quickly, we were ready to go again. Season 8. Well, let me tell you about Season 8, because it would eventually prove to be just as heartbreaking as the previous. It started well. We moved ambitiously, breaking the club transfer record to sign one of the top Asian talents in world football, welcoming Kangin Lee for £44 million from Barcelona. He would replace the outgoing Kaoru Mitoma, who had departed to Al Ettifaq in Saudi, and we strengthened at the back too, bringing in yet another South Korean international in Lee Han-byom for just over £16 million. We would of course again win the Kazakh Domestic League in Season 8, but I really don't need to tell you that. I mean, this was our 9th title in a row. No, this story is all about the Champions League now, and I mentioned heartbreak for a reason. We progressed through the league phase of the 2031-32 Champions League campaign, finishing 13th out of 36 and setting up a knockout playoff tie with Benfica. 6-4 was the aggregate score after a helter-skelter affair, but the last 16 beckoned. Arsenal were our opponents next, and this one was a little bit more cagey. Eventually though, we progressed 2-1 in the tie, setting up a quarter-final against French giants PSG. We'd actually only ever faced PSG once before, and that was in a league phase game, so this was going to be a huge test for us. But listen, I've told you this before, these boys are up to the big tests these days. And a huge 3-1 win in the second leg back in Kazakhstan was enough to overturn a first leg 2-1 loss. And once again, we were into the last 4 of the Champions League. It's almost predictable what happened next. Last season, we'd snuck past Real Madrid in the semi-final, and yeah, this year, it was Real Madrid again. If you recall, last season we needed that great remontada, but this year we were just better. A 2-1 win at home with the winner scored by Song Come Song, and then a very professional 1-1 draw in the Bernabeu, with our goal again being scored by Song Come Song. And we were through to our 2nd consecutive Champions League final. And listen, I told you it was predictable because it was Barcelona in the final again. A rerun of last season's final in Lisbon. This time, the final was held in Baku, Azerbaijan. And I know what you're thinking. You've already told us about the heartbreak. And well, yeah. Ultimately, another heroic run to the final ended in defeat again. This year, you could even argue that the pain was worse, because we suffered the ultimate pain of losing a final to a penalty shootout. The game itself had been cagey to say the least, and after 120 goalless minutes, up stepped our latest signing Lee Han-byom for the first penalty, and Diogo Costa in the Barca net pulled off a fantastic save. Certainly not the best start to the shootout for us. Our own keeper though, Hwang Jian-jun, who was in for the injured Fujioka, pulled off a great save in response from Evan Ferguson's penalty, and so started a process of both sides scoring their next 3 spot kicks. And this is where the heartbreak happens. Mehdi Akbari, stepping up for penalty number 5 for us, could only clip it into Diogo Costa's grateful hands, and all that was left was for Varela to convert Barcelona's 5th to secure back-to-back Champions League titles for them and back-to-back heartbreaks for us. In 2004, a footballing genius by the name of Ian Dowie coined the phrase bounce back ability. And that, right there, is what we'd been able to show by making it back to the final, and would now need to do all over again. But in a similar way to how we've ended lots of seasons in this story, I felt like this squad of players had absolutely loads of bounce back ability about them. As we headed into our 9th season, feeling incredibly Arsenal after back-to-back silver medals, it only really made sense for me to do what I would usually do in situations like this. And that is spend a load of money in the transfer market. In fact, the summer of 2032 represented our biggest spending window so far, splashing a cool £99 million on new talent. Samad Navanic and Zhang Jing were cheaper additions, perhaps squad options, but bigger money was spent on the signature of Saleh Saleh, a young Qatari winger, for around £16 million. And then even more money was spent on the signings of Abdulkadir Kushanov and Jassim Saad. Kushanov, the Uzbeki centre-half, arrived from PSG, while Saad was a Qatari wonderkid striker with a big future ahead of him. We did recoup some of our money by continuing our pattern of selling on our big name signings, as Kangin Lee departed to Al Rayed in Saudi for £36 million, but overall with our spending, our squad had improved incrementally again. Kushanov would probably be the only player guaranteed a starting berth in our 4-2-3-1 system, but that probably spoke more of our increasing strength in depth. And we'd planned to use that strength in depth to once again go far in the Champions League. Third time lucky, right? Bring it on, Barcelona. Except this year, our 9th season at the club saw us take a step backwards again. The league phase wasn't as smooth as we'd hoped, and just 3 wins and 10 points from our 8 league phase games was only enough for a 20th place finish, seeing us only just sneak through to the playoffs. We surely couldn't go from being back-to-back finalists to going out this early. Could we? Well, no. A brilliant performance against a really strong Bayern side over 2 legs saw us prevail 3-2 and book our place in the last 16. But here, in the last 16, our journey would end for another year. Liverpool were our opponents. Well, they did an absolute job on us. A Liverpool team containing former Astana hero Rooney Bargi came to Kazakhstan and won 1-0 with a late Jamal Musiala goal, and then back at Anfield, although we gave it our very best, 2 Endrick goals and a 2-2 draw on the night saw us defeated and ultimately dejected. Dumped out of the Champions League again, and this time we couldn't even blame Lamine Yamal and Barcelona. What was once an almost impossible goal to win the Champions League had become so realistic recently, but once again, right now, it felt really far away again. Manchester City would go on to lift the Champions League trophy in 2033, beating Tottenham Hotspur in Cardiff. Before our Champions League adventures, or disappointments, continued, we did have the rather fun matter of the Club World Cup. This glamour competition, taking place over the summer, was held in France. And it got me thinking, this was perhaps the chance for us to, technically, conquer the entire world. Look, at this stage, having lost 2 Champions League finals, I was beginning to look for other ways to complete this story, even if it was on a technicality. But there would be no technicality ending here, because if defeat to Rooney Bargi's Liverpool in the Champions League last year wasn't disappointing enough, it was them again that delivered the knockout blow. We'd breezed through our group, which included a ridiculous 11-2 victory over Al Nassr, who were oddly being managed by Brendan Rodgers, and proceeded to beat Barcelona and then Inter in the knockouts before setting up the semi-final encounter with Liverpool. But on the night, having taken the lead through Jassim Saad, our old friend Rooney equalised before Ryan Gravenberch grabbed the winner. And so, no, we wouldn't become the champions of the world on this occasion. Liverpool would go on to beat RB Leipzig in the final to claim that title, and our attention turned back to becoming the champions of Europe. Transfers. Following the semi-final defeat in France, attention turned back to recruitment, and the summer of 2033 was less explosive than the summer previous, with the main talking point this time being around the premature departure of Abdulkadir Kushanov. Having only signed last year, he'd been brilliant in our defence, but the idea of a return to Manchester City for the best part of 50 million was too good for anybody to turn down. Fabio Carvalho departed on a free finally too, and we spent most of the Kushyanov money on a new number 10 by the name of Fire Nahuma Rory. We did also sign a centre-back from Myanmar called So-So, who's alright, mid, fine, sort of so-so. Sorry. Our league phase opponents this year included both of our biggest rivals of recent years, Barcelona and Liverpool. But ultimately, despite not managing to win either of these games specifically, 4 wins from our 8 was enough to book us a playoff spot in the next round. The team was functioning well. Nahuma Rory had brought incredible numbers as a shadow striker behind our main man Song Comes Song, and a huge shout out should be given to Farabor's Fala on our left wing and Ko Lee in our midfield. Both had become integral parts of the team and world-class talents in their own right. Into the playoffs, we overturned a first leg deficit to defeat Galatasaray 4-1 in the second leg and 5-3 on aggregate, setting up a last 16 tie with Manchester City. This recurring inevitability of drawing the likes of City, who had just won their 5th Premier League title in 6 years, or a Barcelona, a PSG or a Real Madrid, and that therefore spelling the end of another year's pursuit of the Champions League, it was beginning to wear thin at this stage of the story. But after all, this was the entire point of this enterprise. So, instead of resigning ourselves to defeat, we steeled ourselves for victory, winning the home leg 1-0 thanks to a very early Reza Golizadeh goal, and then subsequently a Fala goal away at the Etihad, enough to secure us the away draw and a 2-1 aggregate victory. Things were looking good, another quarter-final, and the Premier League champions dispatched. And then came the draw. Astana will play FC Barcelona. Again. The old rivalry renewed, this time though, in the earlier stage of the quarter-final. We were at home first. Daiki Naito, Tatsuya Mikado, and then perhaps most notably Song Comes Song, were all out injured, though Jassim Saad led the line for us, supported by the impressive Nahuma Rory behind him. And it was those two that put us into a resounding lead. First, Nahuma Rory slotted a penalty after 6 minutes, and then early in the second half, Ronald Araujo inexplicably passed it straight to Saad, who made it 2-0. There would be more twists and turns though, and just after that Evan Ferguson halved the arrears for Barca from the spot, and then Ko Lee scored for us to make it 3-1. Towards the end, Barca scored a second, but we would be able to take a slender lead to the new camp. And this time we did the job there. Courtesy of another invaluable away goal, this time from Saad, we'd knocked our biggest rivals out of the Champions League. Surely this was the biggest omen yet, that this year, 2034, would be our year. Well, that was until we drew Real Madrid in the semi-final, played the first leg at the Bernabeu, and lost 3-0. Goals from Shelderup, Mainu and Katala completely blew us away after Samad Navanic had been sent off. A complete disaster, and it reminded us of the fragility of this challenge. One bad performance, one red card, one game where you got outclassed, and it was back to the drawing board. Another year of the league phase and going through the motions domestically. And despite a 1-0 win in the home leg, we were once again out. Another semi-final exit and another season where we'd failed. As we headed into season 11, I must admit, I was close to giving up. But we couldn't give up. Not after 11 seasons of progress. Progress that had taken Little Astana to 9th in the European coefficients. Progress that had brought the Kazakhstan League to the 11th best in the world. Not after 11 consecutive titles. Not after 2 Champions League final defeats. Not after bringing the very best Asian talents from around the world to the club. Not after the origin stories of Wang Yang and Song Comes Song, both of which had now passed 250 appearances for the club. No, we had to continue. And so, we went big in the window again. Most notably, big Iranian Abdulrahman Al-Hamdam arrived from Manchester United for 45 million, and Thai international Ekafong Misawat joined for his second spell at the club, back from Al Ettifaq. What a career, by the way. Rochdale, Astana, Al Ettifaq, and back to Astana. We would continue in our 4-2-3-1 as the 2034-35 Champions League opener approached. But we'd lost key players to injuries at the start of this season. Our left back Golizadeh had broken his leg, and last season's main man Nahuma Rory had done his ACL. Misawat, the new arrival, had covered well for him in the number 10 spot, and up front Song Comes Song had already scored 12 goals in just 10 games. Can we just take a minute, by the way, Look at this man here. Brought in for 800k, he'd been a ridiculously consistent performer for us and had now scored 177 goals in the yellow of Astana. Absolute legend. Also, complete side note, but check out the eyebrows of our midfield too. The league phase draw for this year's Champions League was pretty tough. We'd begin with games against Bayern, Inter, and then the holders Real Madrid, for a slightly kinder couple of fixtures in Feyenoord and Anderlecht, before finishing off against Juventus, AEK Athens and Ajax. Despite the toughness of the fixtures, we made a flying start, beating Bayern away 3-1 and then Inter at home 6-0. We'd be forgiven for thinking that this was the form of would-be champions, but then our wings were clipped by losing to Real Madrid and drawing to Feyenoord. Still, the remaining results, wins against Anderlecht and Ajax and defeats to Juventus and surprisingly AEK Athens, they were enough to see us through in 13th place and we'd once again play in the knockout playoff round. Here, we'd meet Eintracht Frankfurt. Perhaps it could be viewed as a relatively kind draw, but Frankfurt would give us a real game. The first leg, played away from home in Germany, would finish as a 2-2 draw, with us needing a late Wang Yang header to level things. Frankfurt, it seemed, were here to ruin the party for us, and we'd need to dig in deep to beat them in the return leg in Kazakhstan. And it certainly did seem like they were here to ruin the party in the 18th minute when Angelo Stiller gave them the lead. But who would we call on in a situation like this? Well, of course, it was Song Comes Song. He levelled the tie on 53 minutes with a thumping finish, capitalising on a defensive mistake, and then 10 minutes later, Bayern Humarori swivelled in the box to put us in front. In front for the first time in the tie actually, but it gave us a lead we'd be able to hold on to progress through. It had been a tough test, but now things would get really serious again. 16 teams remained, 15 teams between us and glory, and we drew Chelsea. Our record against English teams, barring that year where Liverpool crushed all of our dreams at once, was surprisingly decent over the years. This Chelsea team, still being managed by Enzo Maresca, now boasted a lineup including both Cole Palmer and Florian Wirtz, so we knew that they'd be dangerous. The first leg was at the Astana Arena, and we started well. Faribal's Falla gave us a deserved lead on 28 minutes, finishing off a fine move, but it woke Chelsea up, and against what had been the run of play, Cole Palmer levelled with a header from this Patrick Dorgu cross. What followed after that was 65 minutes of Astana dominance. Dominance though without an end product. If we weren't able to find a winner here, the away leg in London would become that much more difficult. But cometh the hour, cometh the man. How many times would this South Korean striker from Ulsan produce the goods for us? Song Comes Song, with just 4 minutes left of normal time, was there to convert Falla's cross, and we were able to ensure that we'd head to Stamford Bridge with something to hold on to. And hold on, we would. Early goals in London from Wang Yang and Falla gave us the true ascendancy in the tie, and despite a late fight back from Chelsea's with goals either side of yet another Champions League goal from Song Comes Song, it finished 3-2 on the night and 5-3 to us on aggregate. And then there were 8. AC Milan, Astana, Inter, PSG, Arsenal, Barcelona, Liverpool and Real Madrid. The creme de la creme of European giants. And then well, us. But we weren't feeling like some wildcard guest entrance anymore. We were here on merit. And when the draw was made, and Real Madrid was the name drawn from the hat to face us, previously a shiver of trepidation may have been the reaction. But no, not anymore. Although, as all of those past seasons had now taught us, we knew it wouldn't be easy. On the 11th of April 2035, the squad and staff made the 3,500-mile flight from Astana to Madrid. The team emerged from the Bernabeu tunnel, shoulders back, heads up, ready to go head-to-head with a Madrid team that had lifted the trophy last May. On the night, the match was a closely contested affair, and only one goal was scored. Unfortunately for us though, it was scored by Samu of Real Madrid. On the hour mark, he converted a wonder goal after a mazy run, and it would be Real Madrid with the advantage in the tie at the midway point. But here, let me take you back to the year 2031, where in a Champions League semi-final, we trailed 4-2 to Madrid heading into a second leg, only to beat them 3-0 back home. Well, this, amongst so many other famous Champions League nights, had prepared us for this point right now. So when Madrid arrived a week later, It was a surprise to absolutely nobody around the club to see Wang Yang and his massive head power in at the near post from Kohli's corner and level the tie. The goal had gone in just the second minute, and now it would be 88 more minutes to separate the teams. But this time, we're on our own turf. In the first half we attacked and we tried, but we couldn't break down Real Madrid. We were still level at the break, and Madrid's game plan had become clear. Sit in, resist our attacks, and try to catch us on the break. And then, at the start of the second half, disaster. There was pinball in our box, and it resulted in Vinicius Jr. heading in on 51 minutes, with Fujioka inexplicably sort of just watching it go in. And Real Madrid had the lead again. And if their game plan had been to sit in and soak up the pressure before the goal, it was that multiplied by 10 now. Chance after chance went begging, and as time ticked into added time, hope began to fade. We'd given it our best, but Real Madrid had proven to be a bridge too far again. Or had they? That was the case until 6.5 minutes deep in injury time. Reza Golizadeh wrestled the ball back in the Madrid box, squared the ball from the Humarori 8 yards out, and he rifled it home, sending our fans crazy and the tie to extra time. And in that extra time period, we refused to be stopped. And on 111 minutes, Mohamed Yusuf, one of our subs introduced from the bench, scored what proved to be the winning goal. And from the very jaws of defeat, we'd snatched victory. Whew. Okay, let's take stock here. The remaining teams in the competition were us, PSG, and our old and new rivals, Barcelona and Liverpool. Were the fairy tale gods setting us up for the perfect crescendo, or were they just being cruel again? Sometimes in Football Manager, I think it's important to just pause. Take a look at your squad, the players that have brought you to where you've got to, the new players, the younger players waiting in the wings. Have a look at the best 11 over the years. Remember your heroes that have since departed. Celebrate the loyal ones that still remain. And as I did this, I saw a squad not just capable of the greatness we sought, but one that was destined for it. And so when it transpired that our semi-final opponents in 2035 would be Barcelona, the fate was too perfect. Those two final defeats, watching Barcelona lift the trophy in front of us, would put the wind in our sails as we emerged from the tunnel at the Nou Camp for the first leg. And we made a flying start. Bayern Humarori scored a beauty just 4 minutes in, and then 10 or so minutes later, doubled our lead with another beautiful sweeping finish. A 2-0 lead. It couldn't get much better. Except, it could. Right before halftime, Song Come Song had his usual say on a night like this as he headed in at the near post from a corner. It was 3-0. Yes, there was a long way to go, but the final, another final, was now in touching distance. Unless, of course, we bottled it. In the past, we'd been the team in Barcelona's position, needing a miracle, and well, we knew it was possible. So when their English striker James Murphy scored just past the hour mark, we needed to not panic. And then we did panic. With 15 minutes to play, Max Renwick scored a thunderbolt from 25 yards, and our seemingly unassailable lead had all but evaporated. Experience had taught us about momentum, and everybody expected a Barcelona equaliser soon. And even we felt like it was unavoidable. And they tried. Oh, they tried. But as Barcelona's efforts went off target or were blocked, our resistance grew. And then, in the 95th minute, it was us that scored next. Pavel Novikov, one of 2 Kazakhstani players in our squad, headed in at the back post, and we led by 2 again, 4-2 on aggregate, and a huge advantage for the second leg, until Barcelona went up the other end and Adam Wharton scored to make it 4-3. A topsy-turvy night, and yeah, it could have gone a lot better, but ultimately, we had given ourselves a lead to hold on to at home, and if we could hold on, we'd be in a Champions League final again. Incredibly, at least in terms of pure narrative, Liverpool had given themselves a strong lead in the other semi-final over PSG, and it looked like if we could hold on, it would be them that we'd meet in the final. Holding on though would not be easy. It was a cagey night in Kazakhstan, with just the 1-goal lead to hold on to, and the first half it saw little by the way of goalmouth action. 45 to play, 45 minutes away from the final again, unless disaster. Just before the hour mark, Golizade, usually so reliable for us, tripped Lamine Yamal in the box. Penalty to Barcelona, and up stepped, as he had done loads of times before against us, Evan Ferguson to slot past Fujioka and level the tie. The final 30 minutes saw things open up slightly as both teams searched for a winner. But as the full-time whistle blew, nothing separated the two teams. 4-4 the aggregate score, and extra time beckoned. To me, personally, at this stage, things felt inevitable. It was going to be another cruel loss to Barcelona and another year of failure. It had happened so many times before, we'd had to go again and again and again. The players on the pitch, though, they didn't agree. On 101 minutes, Nahuma Rory found Daiki Naito in space on the left, and our little South Korean rifled it home to put us ahead again. This, though, woke Barcelona up, and a long ball forward caused mayhem behind our tired defence, and James Murphy slotted home again to level things up after 107 minutes. But even that didn't make our players lie down. No, in front of their adoring fans, they picked themselves up again, and Naito's cross eventually found Nahuma Rory, who could smash it past Costa in the Barcelona goal, and we led again. This time, the message was simple. This time, we don't let it slip. And we didn't. In fact, with 4 minutes to play, our young midfielder from the UAE, Nasser Al-Hamadi, scored a beauty to rubber stamp a glorious victory. Astana were heading to a Champions League final again. Elsewhere, Liverpool did indeed do the business in their semi-final, with Rooney Bargi their goalscorer to maintain their lead in the second leg. And it would be them, and indeed Rooney, that we would face in the final. The final would take place in Solna, Sweden, and I'd now have the task of a Champions League final team selection. We'd been well blessed with a full complement of players after 2 weeks off, and our back five was an easy decision. Fujioka would keep net, with Golizade and Chen Hong as wingbacks, and Al Hamdan and Wang Yang at centre-half. The only real contentious decision needed to be made in central midfield, with Kohli currently unhappy with not starting enough games recently, but the decision was that he would though partner Tatsuya Mikado as a pair, with Fire Nahuma Rory in front of them in the 10. Fala would play off the left, Naito off the right, and of course Song Kum Song would lead the line. And so, this was it. The Liverpool team on the night was monstrous. Jamal Musiala, Endrick, and of course Rooney Bargi. But the Astana fans, dressed in their yellow, had travelled in their thousands. And they didn't just hope, they expected. So when that man Song Kum Song gave us the lead on just 4 minutes with a beautifully taken finish off Nahuma Rory's through ball, the fans took the atmosphere to another level. This was it. This was going to be our night. But then, 10 minutes later, Liverpool scored. Stefan Bajcetic forced the ball past Fujioka, and things were all square again. But Song Kum Song was a man possessed. Again, he latched onto a Nahuma Rory through ball, and again, the finish was clinical. Astana led again, and there was less than 20 minutes on the clock. We were the better team here, truly. The Liverpool defence looked shaky, and we knew if we were strong and if we kept our heads, we could take the game away from them. And when it comes to heads, there are few more impressive than Wang Yang's, and he made the most of it again just 90 seconds later to power in a header at the near post, as he had done on so many occasions before. And that was that for the first half. We led 3-1, and we were on the precipice of greatness. Straight after the break, Rooney Bargi went close to making it 3-2, and then on 57 minutes, Endrick did indeed make the score 3-2. Oh God, it couldn't happen like this, I thought to myself. But then, in the frenzy of the panic of the Liverpool goal, a realisation dawned on me. All the best stories have great heroes, and for a long time now, it had been pretty clear that the main character in this story had been Song Kum Song. And at that next moment, in the 70th minute, he decided that this was going to be his night. And there would be, in fact, no way back for Liverpool. As Fala squared the ball across the box, Song Kum Song smashed in his hat-trick, giving Trubin in the goal no chance. And that was that. We saw the game out to win 4-2. And Astana, with a squad full of Asian players, were finally champions of Europe. And so, that, my friends, is where this story ends. We had taken little Astana from Kazakhstan to the very pinnacle of the European game and done it with just Asian players. A true Football Manager story. and I really hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.
Suicide machines sprung from cages on Highway 9, poured real fuel injected and stepping out over the line. Oh, baby, this town rips the bones from your back. It's a death trap, it's a suicide rap. You've got to get out while we're young. 'Cause champs like us, maybe we were born to run. When you let me in, I wanna be your friend. I wanna guide your dreams and visions. Just wrap your legs around these velvet hips and strap your hands, 'cause my engines together we could break